This lecture will deal with the marketing environment.
Political and regulatory forces have a significant impact on the marketing environment. Think about the impact public policy can have on a company. For example, in the 1990s, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, significantly reduced trade barriers with Mexico and Canada, giving U.S. companies greater access to those markets. Many manufacturers have taken advantage of this by moving factories to the less expensive Mexico, thus reducing product costs. The trends in the economy is something that has to be watched closely by marketers. Companies will have experts that will interpret key economic indicators like unemployment, inflation, and GDP. In the news recently, there has been a lot of discussion centering on income distribution. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class continues to shrink. The top 10% of earners account for approximately half of the income in the United States, and the bottom half of the earners account for approximately 15% of the U.S. income, according to recent census information. This has given rise to what marketers call value brands, or store brands, or actually value or store locations. The U.S. continues to go through significant social changes. We have shifts in the age of the population as the portion of the population who are known as the Depression kids continues to shrink, and what was the largest cohort at one point in time in the U.S. history, the baby boomers, who were born between 1946 and 1964, now have taken a back seat to the millennials who were born between 1980 and 2000, with Gen X sandwiched in between. As a marketer, adjustments need to be made to account for millennials' comfort with and actually demand for the use of technology in daily interactions. What about the American family? Let me ask you this question. Of the following groups, which is the largest group, would you say, between married couples with children, married couples without children, single parents, and non-family households, meaning folks who are single or who are living together? Well, if you guess married couples with children, you're wrong. They account for approximately between 23 and 25% of the population. Now, if you guess married without children, you're still wrong. They account for approximately 28 to 30% of the population. Now, if you guess single parents, well, you're still wrong. They account for approximately between 13 and 15%. The largest family group is the non-family group. Singles and folks living together, they account for approximately 30 to 32%. What about shifts in where folks live? At one point in time, folks moved from the city to the suburbs. Now you're having people who are moving to the suburbs of the suburbs. So you're seeing a shift away from the city. What about increasing diversity in the United States? Did you know the purchasing power for African Americans, and they account for approximately 13% of the population, is between $1 trillion and $1.3 trillion? What about Hispanic Americans? Now, they're actually the largest minority, and they account for 17% of the U.S. population, and they have a buying power of $1.3 trillion to $1.5 trillion. Now, here's an interesting fact for you. Even though the buying power for Asian Americans is somewhere between $800 billion to $1 trillion, they actually only account for approximately 6% of the population. You see more and more companies nowadays who are trying to target LGBT groups because they are also a viable target to go after in terms of their purchasing power. So you can see how the U.S. is changing from a social standpoint. In today's current environment, there are factories or manufacturers who have machines or robots that can accomplish today what it took years ago many people to do. So by having this type of automation in the work environment, it allows for companies to significantly reduce their costs. Here's a question I want to ask you. Think about the first time you were on the internet and think about what you could do. I can remember my first exposure to the internet was when I was in graduate school, and I had a professor stand in front of the room, and he had 2 screens set up, and he was there in Bloomington, Indiana, and he had an email account. They also had the email account set up in Switzerland, and I remember he sent himself a note from Bloomington, Indiana to his account in Switzerland, and it appeared there in seconds. And I remember how cool that was, that in a matter of seconds he could send himself information. That was my first exposure to the internet. Think about things like smartphones or social media. So as a marketer, if you made a mistake or you gave bad customer service, for the most part it stayed between you and the customer. Nowadays, with the spreading of the smartphones and also social media, if a customer has a bad or even a good experience, that can be known to thousands of people in a matter of seconds. So you can kind of see the impact that technology has in the marketing environment. Think about all the legislation passed to protect companies from each other, which promotes competition, or protecting consumers from unfair trade practices like minimizing deception through misleading advertising, pricing, or packaging, or protecting society by regulating corporate activities by minimizing things like the impact on the environment. So when analyzing the marketing environment, think in terms of political, economic, social, technological, and legal. Hopefully this helps. Have a good one.